Hi, Jodi. So good to see you again. You probably know this, but I will introduce myself. My name is Petia Whitmore, and I am the founder of My MBA Path. And My MBA Path is this brand spanking new company of one, just about 9 months old now, which empowers MBA candidates on their journey to graduate business school.
See, look at that. And you were nervous. All right. So Petra was so nervous, like, oh my God, I'm going to sit there and say this. I'm going to say that. I'm not going to go, just
Which
talk.
version do I come up with?
Just talk. All right. So we have a lot to unpack, but we're not going to talk about the business yet. So we're going to talk about, all right. So for anyone that knows, for anyone that's listening, everyone and anyone that's listening / watching, we know each other because we're in the same MBA school. We went to Babson College in Wellesley, Massachusetts. Constantly ranked #1 for entrepreneurship. So it is shocking when people go, it really is shocking to me when people go and get real jobs or go back to their regular job, because when they're at Babson, they teach us, they empower us to create our own thing. And so both of us are internationals. It was already in our DNA anyway. So of course, this is the way we were going to go. But I mean, this is just so that everyone knows how we know each other. We know each other because we went to school together. So let's just start from there.
Yeah.
But as everyone's talking to you, we hear a little accent. Hear an accent.
Yeah.
So where are you now? Where are you from? And let's just take you from when you were little all the way till college.
Awesome. All right. So I was born and raised in Bulgaria. Just like you said, there's this, I don't know if it's little, I consider my accent an accessory by now, because English is not my first language. It's also not my second, it's not my third, it's my fourth actually. So born and raised in Bulgaria, this teeny tiny place in the southeasternmost part of Europe and the European Union. It's kind of like where Europe ends, and right after it, the Middle East, Asia starts. So born and raised there, lived there for the first 30 years of my life, so I'm going to date myself now. Moved to the United States 21 years ago, almost to the date. I actually celebrate that day. It's September 26th. I call it Welcome to America Day, and sort of usually do like a little fun thing around it because I grace that wonderful country with my presence. But from birth to college, so I was born in a teeny tiny town, very, very old, but really tiny. In 1985, we celebrated the 800th anniversary of my hometown. So you can imagine, founded somewhere in like the 11th century. I mean, Europe is old, as you know, right? So very small town on the Danube River. So what was funny about that is that the Bulgarian side of the Danube, which is obviously the largest river in Europe, is very hilly. And then on the other side of the Danube is Romania. So the river serves as a border between the two countries. And because Bulgaria is hilly, I grew up with a view to another country. Literally from our house, from our high school, we could have the view of the river and of Romania on the other side. But what was probably most notable about the first 18, 20 years of my life was that Bulgaria was still a communist country at the time, right? We were still part of the Eastern Bloc. So not a lot of freedom, even though when you don't know anything different and when you grow up like this, you kind of don't understand the limitations that are imposed to you in their full extent, but there was no international travel that was really possible. There were limitations on where you could go to school, what you could study, even where you could live. You weren't necessarily allowed to live, to just decide, oh, I'm just gonna live in Boston or I'm gonna move to New York. It just didn't work this way. You're only allowed to, when you graduated high school, to apply to one university, and each university had its own entrance exam. I was actually thinking about this yesterday, not necessarily in relationship to this interview, but just in general. I was kind of lazy. I was really good at math, and the easiest thing for me to do was to apply and go to an engineering university. But what I miscalculated is that it's very easy to get in, but it's goddamn hard to graduate. So I don't know how I made it through my first master's, because that was also the educational system at the time, was that you didn't go for a bachelor's, you just went for a master's. So I somehow acquired a master of science in engineering and HVAC.
Wait, sidebar. So, so is there anything that is equivalent to a bachelor's, or do we just go automatically?
Nowadays there is.
Okay.
Nowadays it's all uniform, sort of the Bologna Accord, which is one of the educational imperatives of Europe, made it be the same as here. Back in the day, it was you either went for an associate degree, so a 2-year degree, or you went for a master's. So, I mean, just think about it, Jodi. You're 18, like all you want to do is party, and you're supposed to pick your profession, like a master's. So, like I said, I ended up in engineering school. It taught me to problem solve. It also helped with the GMAT someday, eventually down the road, when I decided to apply to business school, right? I mean, I
don't even want to talk about GMATs. Hated it. Hated it.
But it definitely wasn't my my passion. But then, just by virtue of when I graduated, there were a lot of opportunities that opened up to me. But I'm going to pause here and see sort of like, where do you want me to go from here?
Okay, I'm happy you did that. I'm happy you did that yourself, because I'm gonna let her take her last breath, because we're gonna rewind a little bit more. Mom, dad, do you have siblings? And are anyone in your family, is anyone in your family an entrepreneur?
So no one in my family is an entrepreneur. Mom and dad, who obviously also grew up during communism and got educated during that time. I mean, there was no private enterprise during their time until probably until the time they were already in their 50s. So they ended up working in government jobs. They both had advanced degrees in agricultural science, and they both worked in large, they used to be called agricultural industrial complex in the old Eastern Bloc, right? So large organizations that collectively owned and worked and managed all the land, crops, anything that has to do with agriculture in Bulgaria. So they were not entrepreneurs per se, they just managed large organizations eventually, I mean, when their careers grew. Fun fact for you, speaking of mom and dad, and by the way, they're no longer with us, both of them, but mom's specialty was tobacco growing, because Bulgaria is actually a major, or used to be, a major producer of tobacco. So in 1983, when yours truly was a teenager, my mom was sent on assignment to Cuba, because Cuba, being a friendly communist country at the time, right, was interested in growing a new kind of tobacco that wasn't typical for them. It was new to them. And they imported the technology, the know-how from Bulgaria, and they brought a team of experts to take them through one entire growing cycle. So my mom went in fall and stayed until spring, fall and spring in Bulgaria, which is spring through fall in Cuba, right? It's reversed, and taught the Cubans how to grow a new kind of tobacco. And then another fun fact for you, she came back, and among all the wonderful souvenirs that she brought was a whole bunch, like fairly big quantities of handmade Cuban cigars. Well, everyone in Europe smokes. So guess what were I mean, I'm not a smoker anymore. I never really was, but guess what my first sort of sneaking my first cigarettes for me meant? Sneaking my first handmade Cubans.
Well, I was going to say, so I've been to Cuba, and it was while I was at Babson. So I went to 12 countries in 1 year for a form of a thesis that I wrote. And Cuba was my first place. And I remember Professor Cohen said, you know, if you get your passport taken away, this entire plan is just like out the window. It's the first country. And I'm like, oh, no pressure whatsoever. But it was really fascinating I mean, everyone knows about the Cuban cigars, but when you're actually seeing and the feels and the process of how it's being made, it's like, I mean, you have the respect for the cigar. I mean, I'm not a cigar smoker, but I love the smell of that. The smell of that and a pipe.
It's amazing.
Are two smells. And when it's good, it's good. And to see the older men in Cuba smoking cigars, and they're there's no carcinogens, there's nothing in it. It's just pure, perfect. And people are like, oh, cancer. I'm like, no, they don't worry about that because they know what they're smoking. It's like when you go to Germany and you're drinking the beer and everyone's thin and everyone's like, well, how's that possible? Because in the United States, everyone has a pot belly. They're like, because they know the 4 ingredients that are in all the beers in Germany. Which when I was in Berlin, I was like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever had, and I'm not a beer drinker.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It also makes for a really great icebreaker. So the Cuban cigars are one of my favorite stories. I have another one, which is even more shocking if you want me to go in that direction.
Well, let's go. I mean, mind you, I'll give you this one. I go because there's many more things that we're going to talk about.
So one of the things that was mandatory when I was growing up was military education. So we had to both sort of like study the theory and tactics of defending ourselves.
Wait, did you have to be like Israel? Did you guys have to? Is it required for you to be in the military?
So no, it wasn't a compulsory service for everyone. There was a compulsory service for men. Immediately after you graduated high school, you had to go for 2 years at the time, unless you had any health conditions. And then even if you got accepted to college, you still had to go and serve your 2 years first, but not for women, fortunately. But in high school, it was part of the curriculum, right? They taught us things. We didn't even had like field exercises. So I was professionally trained to be able to operate an AK-47. It was a really good shot.
It's so surprising how, because right now kids are, I mean, in true reality, kids are being trained as well because of mass shooters. So the training that's happening in school now, because I've spoken to a lot of my friends internationally, and they were like, I go, it's horrific in regards to the situations that are happening in schools. But the kids in international schools are being trained because they go to the military, or they're just very aware of the safety mechanisms. Some countries, they don't have to worry about it at all. But again, there's like that mindset of like, we're always being prepared for something. And so it's very interesting how I speak to a lot of companies in Israel. I have clients in Israel, and just learning how everyone feels like, well, we went through this, some sort of a process like this when we were in our younger years.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, that education actually culminated in 2 weeks of field exercise where they took for a camp and you had simulations and whatnot. Mine was different than the rest because the year when mine was supposed to happen, Chernobyl happened, right? And even though you probably know enough about what happened and how sort of like the severity of the situation was hidden from us, and we weren't necessarily protected and informed. But at least they had the presence of mind to realize that taking a bunch of, we were just graduating 10th grade, which is the last but one. Education used to go to 11th grade. So 11th was the last year of high school. At least they had the presence of mind to not take us to some forest, to some fields, and have us be completely exposed to the aftermath of Chernobyl. It was literally weeks after it. So my sort of field training was a little delayed, but it still went on.
Let's talk about that for a quick second. I mean, this is before you even came to the States, which we'll talk about how you even got here. But I mean, so I mean, it literally is like, I'm like, where do I want to start? How is it's so funny. I could see the question in my head, and I'm like, oh my God, where do I start here? How do you wrap your head around the fact that you were raised in this location at this moment of time? And how does that not change the way that you have now continued to develop as an individual? Clearly, we know what happened. Clearly, we know in regards of the ripple effect, how the world has seen you. But how does that not affect you, or has it affected you in regards of who you are right now?
Oh, it definitely affects you. And it's very interesting, Jodi, because that sort of view of the past and looking back is a process that never ends. It's something that you continue to do because you also gain a slightly different perspective as you age, right? And as you witness the historic events that surround you nowadays, the things that are going to become a similar in terms of magnitude landmark 20 years from now. So it definitely affects you. It's interesting for me to think about two things. how easy it was for a government that had such control over the media, over its population, to cover that fact and proceed the way they did. I mean, that's something that could have never happened nowadays. So it's interesting to think about it this way. I mean,
well, you say it would never happen, but there are countries that it's clearly happening.
True. I mean, I can't necessarily claim that I have complete political overview over the globe, but I feel that even in countries where it's happening, at least through social media, through certain channels, some of it leaks out. And maybe some of it did at the time to you, we just didn't know, right? But it's also interesting to think, again, it was 1986 that the uncovering of that fact, and I don't remember the exact details, but I believe that there were some stations in the Scandinavian countries that started to make a big deal out of it.
Yep.
And to broadcast. So I personally pegged that attempt at a cover up and how terrible it was with the impact on the population, and how trust really completely unraveled. I personally feel that that was probably the most pivotal event that led to the fall of the Berlin Wall compared to anything else. Obviously, the circumstances were right. Just the economic smoke and mirrors couldn't be maintained anymore. But I think that complete breach of trust, of however little trust there was to begin with, to me was a really pivotal moment. And I do reminisce every year around that time, because I remember exactly what I was doing when it happened. I remember where I was, who I was with before we even learned. We learned only a few days later. And it's just the magnitude of it doesn't diminish.
It's so it's sad, because in America, as you know, we pick and choose. We cherry pick what stories that we are going to gravitate towards the most. And I remember I was in high school, I was 17 years old, and it was just glossed over. It was the day after my birthday, and it was just glossed over. And
it didn't
people
matter.
Yeah, and mind you, it's in the history books, but still pretty much it's in the history books. But things in the States we're glossing things over unless it affects us directly. And so that's why I was like, at your age, I mean, and I don't know how old you were at the time, but it's one of those moments where you're living it. I mean, we're very close to the same age, or if not the same age. Actually, no, I think I'm older than you. But I mean, but we're at that age where we're younger, we're in our teens, and this global moment of time is happening. People are being hurt, and one country's just like, didn't hurt us, we're not going to pay attention. Oh my God, let's go to the mall. And then there's another group of young people that are like, what's happening? Here's my family, my relatives. This is now my future. No matter where I go, people will hear where I'm from, and they're going to ask, if they're aware, they're going to ask about what your feelings and your thoughts were at the time.
I mean, speaking of this was actually one of my biggest sort of discoveries, revelations, aha moments, if you wish, when I came to the United States in 2000, how US-centric the news are. I mean, I was by then, obviously in 2000, like Bulgaria was on its way of being a market economy. Everything had changed, the entire business landscape, marketing landscape, media landscape. So our news, and to this day, I travel to Europe a lot. I travel around the world a lot. Everywhere you go, you turn on the news, and it's maybe 50% about the place where you're at, the country that you're at, and then the rest is what's happening around the world. This is definitely not the case here. When I lived in Europe still, I knew the name of the head of state of every country.
Yes.
Not in the world, but like at least the major ones.
Major, yep.
They were constantly mentioned. So like, oh, this is Canada, this is France. I mean, so I probably know the heads of states of 5 countries nowadays.
Yeah, which is sad, because it's just the same thing as if I'm using Waze, or if I'm just like getting directions, I can figure out directions, or if I'm dialing the phone number, or if I'm just like pulling up the name on my phone. I mean, when we were little, I used to know everyone's phone number by heart. Now I'm like, I know my own, I know my mother's, and that's it.
I actually sometimes have to check my own when people ask me. Like if I'm not in the right mindset, I have to pause for a second and be like, wait a second, what's my phone number?
Yeah, it's which is like it's an unfortunate thing. We've become very lazy in our thoughts, but we are in a situation where we're being allowed to be lazy.
Yeah.
We're being allowed to be lazy. Let's switch gears a little bit. In regards to when did you get to the States? I mean, when did you make a decision of, I should say, graduated, got the job, and then States. So give me the progression of that.
Sure. So I graduated and worked as an engineer for exactly 1 year, worked as a sales engineer.
Okay, sales engineer, okay.
A sales engineer for a German company. And I was like, no, this absolutely doesn't speak to my heart. The good thing about the 90s in Bulgaria is that no one really had formal business education, especially like in the early to mid 90s, because the country didn't produce formal business education. We had the 5-year plan, right? We didn't need someone with management skills or leadership skills. And that created an opportunity for those of us who may not have had the formal training, but who were adventurous enough to gain skills a certain way and enter fields that they may not have been formally trained for. So I ended up working for an advertising agency, first for a small local one, and then for one of the big 5. Because the best thing that I ever did during my 5 years in engineering school is that in the last year, I actually started learning English.
Yep.
So I hired a private tutor. I had an aptitude for languages. So within a year, I spoke well enough, right, for the landscape there. So advertising, tons of fun. I work with some large global brands. Some I'm very proud of, some probably not as much. Because my other claim to fame is that I actually helped bring McDonald's to Bulgaria.
I love it.
So it was at the time when that was a huge new market. It was opening up. I think that the first McDonald's opened in Russia, even in the late 80s, it was kind of like a novelty. But then after 1989, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when the economies opened up, it was a huge opportunity. And McDonald's had this really interesting strategy. When they entered a new market, they never franchised for quite a few years. They owned their stores, they owned the supply chain, and they established themselves as a brand in very strategic ways. So unlike the United States, in Bulgaria during those times, McDonald's was positioned almost like a luxury brand, a family restaurant, a place to be. One of the most fashionable things was for families of the wealthy to go and have their kids' birthday parties at the playground and the sort of kids' corner at McDonald's. That was considered sort of like, oh, you've arrived, right? It also, initially you could smoke at a McDonald's.
That was here in the States as well. I mean, that was, well, remember, I mean, I don't know if you remember where you could even smoke on planes.
I do. And also certain restaurants serve beer. Certain McDonald's restaurants serve beer, which was really cool, really good beer too. So as part of my work for their advertising agency, so I was the account director. So I was the person who managed the global national budget for McDonald's Bulgaria, which was pretty substantial at the time. But regardless of what your position was, you were supposed to go and work in a store at least 1 week a year. Like you just go and you don your uniform and you flip burgers and you serve and this and that. But of course, they're not going to train you super extensively just for that 1 week. So they very often put me at the cash register, right? So I'm working the cash register. Those 2 British ladies are coming up. I'm taking their order. We're making small talk. And they look at me and they're like, your English is excellent. Why are you working at McDonald's? And then at this point, I'm like, okay, there's a line behind them. Do I tell them my life story? Do I just sort of move on? I'm like, this is how life happens sometimes. So to this day, there are probably like 2 British ladies somewhere telling the story of like this Bulgarian girl with excellent English, like working the register at McDonald's. So,
not realizing who she's going to be, not realizing.
The entrepreneur in the making. But the coming to the US was actually, there's really not all that great of a story around it, because I never really had an interest in coming here. I had not played the famous green card lottery, which you could play when you live in Bulgaria. You could like literally submit your information for it. I just wasn't really interested in it. But I met, at the time, my future husband, now my former husband. And
So many layers to this story.
I know, and it just made more sense that I had to come here as opposed to the other way around. So that was the.
Is he Bulgarian as well?
No, he was an American.
Okay. All right. So you met him there or here?
We met online. We were one of the.
You know what? I'm not gonna lie to you. I will say this over and over and over again. Whenever someone meets anyone online or someone gets a job on LinkedIn, I'm always like, wow, it really does work. Wow.
Well, it worked. I mean, I was married for a very long time, so it's not like it was the meeting online did not necessarily in any way preclude the relationship of marriage from being strong for many, many years. So yes, it does happen. It's kind of crazy that way. But probably the most significant thing about that was, which impacted me in so many ways for a long time, is that unlike people who had the resolve and the goal of coming to the United States, I wasn't as prepared and I lacked the motivation. So my motivation was, I fell in love with someone, wanted to be with that person, but then you give up your career, you give up your entire circle. And again, when you make that conscious choice because you're seeking better economic opportunities, that motivation makes everything very different. For me, it felt like a sacrifice, quite frankly. So my first few years were incredibly hard from that perspective.
Yep.
I lived in a very small town in Massachusetts. I lived in Plymouth, which is not necessarily a global environment, especially not at the time.
Not at all. It still is not.
I'm just trying to be kind in case anyone.
It's not being kind, but it's just not the global S of it is when tourists come to Plymouth. I mean, Plymouth is known for the pilgrims, like Plymouth Rock. I mean, like it's known for history, but it's not known for being a global area other than when guests come.
Right. So I didn't really have a lot of career opportunities. I had to take a major step back professionally. I had been considering education for a while. For whatever reason, I don't even know exactly how it came on my radar in the mid 90s, but some of my friends started to go for their MBAs at the time.
Yeah.
And at the time, probably the only really affordable option was to go to a university called Central European University based in Budapest.
Yeah.
And still, it was probably $10,000 to get your MBA. It was a 1-year MBA, and $10,000 was more than what I was making a year in Bulgaria, even though I was already in the top 10%.
Yes.
Income-wise, but again, just to give you a sense of sort of economic power, if you wish, at the time. And then when I first came to the US, I kind of knew that education is probably going to end up being the key to reestablishing myself professionally in this new environment. But initially, it was really, really scary for me. Bulgaria was a cash economy. The whole notion of taking a loan and paying for what felt at the time an exorbitantly expensive degree just scared me, and not having an income for a couple of years. So I waited and waited for a little bit. And then finally in 2006, which was several years after I came here, I was just feeling so stuck professionally, not fulfilled. And I was already in my mid 30s at the time. I'm like, you know what? I need to go back to school. So hence the GMAT, right? And all of that fun stuff. And then Babson, as you can imagine. And then that was a truly pivotal event for me. Just my life and career went in a completely different direction or set of directions, and the fun began.
Did your careers, as in did the positions that you had after you graduated from school, have the engineering degree, you have all these different companies that you've worked for, and to the point of where you are now starting a company, was there an overlap of, hey, I learned all these different skill sets that are going to make me that much better and stronger in doing what I do now? Or is it just like clean slate? I went to get my MBA, I worked a little bit, but now what I'm creating has nothing to do with anything I've ever done. Because I always feel that you can never erase what you've done. There's always skill sets, but I don't know if the skill sets that you have can actually be related to what you're doing now.
I think that everything I've done in my past has a lot to do and has threads that lead from way back then up until now, whether it's skills, whether it's experiences, qualities that you build. I personally, and I think it's a matter of what you believe in a way, sort of like what story of your own life do you tell yourself,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
In my story, everything I've done definitely has continued to lead to what I'm doing nowadays, even if I had no idea back at the time I was doing it that one day it was going to lead to what I'm doing now. But
Yep.
I definitely still think of my experience working in advertising and marketing back in the day,
Mhm.
because obviously marketing is so pivotal to everything we do nowadays.
Everything. I tell people that all the time. Everything you do, you cannot get away from marketing, no matter
Absolutely.
what. You got up
No
this
matter
morning, you
what.
brushed your teeth, you washed your face. I'm thinking that you washed your other parts, and that's marketing right from the start. So if you can't, I mean, like you just cannot escape it.
Yep. So in some ways, everything that I've ever done has led to this moment. I was actually thinking about this just recently because my venture being so new and everything I'm doing being so different than what I've done in the past, in that I've never been the owner of what I do, right? The sole proprietor, if you wish. But I definitely draw on skills, on experiences. It's almost like I've been slowly building up to this moment without even being completely conscious of it or aware of it. I'm sure that at some point there was an intent behind it. Babson, definitely. I mean, oh my goodness, I got bitten by the entrepreneurial bug like irretrievably, right? I mean, I drank the Kool-Aid, but I also drank it like liberally and with intent. So I think that by the time I graduated, I knew I wanted to start something. But again, you probably know, I mean, I'm sure Babson actually teaches you that entrepreneurs are fairly risk averse, as opposed to the popular notion that we're hungry for risk and willing to take risks. That's not really the case in reality. So I needed to build the infrastructure around my ability to launch something, mitigate my own risk. But also, what was critical for me was I needed to become an expert in something. I needed to become known for something, so that there's something after that that I could draw upon. And what I'm currently doing, which is essentially it's in its infancy and it's still coaching right now. I mean, if you're going to be a successful coach, you have to have the expertise to help others succeed in whatever you're doing. Obviously, I also have plans for developing different products and services, but I've started with coaching simply because it's the best way for me to learn how that process works, and to learn what those on the receiving end really need. And then from there will flow a whole different set of innovation.
Well, I like the way that you said that you want to make sure you learn to be an expert. Not all people, everyone could own their own business. Not everyone should own their own business. Because one of the reasons why when I'm talking to people and they have a business and they're trying to do so many different things, and people always say like, you do too many things in your business. I'm like, I do one thing and one thing only. It's marketing. I love, breathe, eat marketing. I have different channels of how I do marketing, but that's the only thing I know how to do nothing else in this world. Marketing is what I do. Marketing to small businesses is what I want to do it, who I want to do it for. So marketing, small business and startups, that's my story. There you go. On a global level, because I'm a global person. So I love that you just said that, to learn that expertise, so that way you're able to do the business and you're going to have different verticals. I mean, I couldn't even be happier with the fact that you know it. You don't have to be told that at all, which is a great thing. So talk about, what do you do and who do you do it for?
So what I currently do is I work with candidates who are applying to graduate business school, to pretty much the top 25 to 50 MBA programs in the world. So these are all leaders in the making who are aspiring to do even bigger things. And the road to business school is actually not an easy one, especially if you're applying to an incredibly selective program. So they need help along the way, which is guidance, understanding what the schools are looking for, understanding what this whole notion of positioning and branding yourself as an MBA candidate really means. It's funny because when I start talking to them about branding at first, even if they come from a marketing background, at first they're like, but wait a second, I'm not a product. It doesn't matter. We're all a product in a certain way. The collective sort of the cumulative set of features, messages, how we present ourselves to those that we communicate with. This could all be viewed through the lens of marketing.
Yep.
So I help them become stronger candidates, and I help them become stronger candidates kind of the right way, because there is more than one way of being a really strong candidate. When they work with me, it starts with very extensive researching and soul searching, because I truly believe that when you're setting yourself on the path of dedicating a couple of years and a major financial investment to your education, you have to do it for the right reasons. You have to do it at the right place. That's a really great fit for you. So that's what I currently do.
So are you helping them figure out which is the best school for them, or do they already know where they want to go? So like, and I'm so sorry to interrupt. Is it the individual that is, I graduated from my undergrad, I have no idea what I want to do, and I just kind of went right into my MBA, or is it the individual that has wants elevation in their career?
So they come to me at different stages of their exploration, different stages of their journey. The ones who, I do a lot of work, not necessarily for free, but I'm always available to have a conversation, I have free consultation and help someone along. My main motivation behind what I'm doing is I actually have a lot of knowledge about this, and I want to help people. That truly is what I love doing. So sometimes I get people who are very early on who know that maybe down the line they're going to want to have to do an MBA. So we have an early conversation where I kind of help them think about what should the next couple of years look like for them. But the ones who engage with me and truly end up working with me are the ones who know they're going to apply, the ones who are already in the process of applying, who want some guidance. And yes, it very often starts with, let's talk about programs aligned with your goals, with schools where the culture is aligned around what you aspire to do and where you can thrive. It very often starts there. Sometimes they know what schools, they absolutely have their list, and we simply just work on branding, positioning, understanding how to think of your story as a candidate. Because when you think about it, especially to the very competitive programs, your MBA application is a marketing document.
100%, 100%.
And you have to understand what each piece serves for, and you have to treat it accordingly. And there's nothing tricky or shady about that at all. It's just being smart and strategic about understanding why they're asking these questions. What are my most valuable stories and experiences that I'm going to share with them to paint a picture of who I am as a candidate? And where do all these stories belong? And what's the right way to tell them too? Because some people just, it takes some coaxing the story out of them, and also some shaping it a little bit so that the right key messages are being put forward, as opposed to a lot of unnecessary detail.
I do love that you said that. So when I was applying for my MBA program, I put down, and I have a obnoxious amount of stories. I mean, so it was just trying to figure out which one made the most sense to this program. And at the time, I had just finished running a marathon, the Boston Marathon, and I wrote it. And the person that interviewed me literally, I mean, and I was like, I went like online, like, what are you supposed to do? Like, why is the manhole round? I mean, all these answers. I had answers to all these random questions that people said, these are the things that they're going to ask you. I'm like, I go, okay. I mean, in the fear of God, because I work in the media, I'm like, these are so silly. These questions are so silly, but whatever, I'm going to learn it. And then the person that interviewed me, she goes, hey, I go, I saw that you run marathons. And I'm like, yeah. So in my mind, I'm prepared for why is the manhole round? And she's talking, she sees the marathon and she's like, well, I go, I'm dying to run a marathon. I'm like, I go, what do you have to do? And I'm like, okay. So we start talking about the process. I go, what do you eat? I got how many times I run, the whole entire training process. And then before you know it, she's like, oh my God, it was great talking to you. I go, we'll let you know. And I got off the phone thinking, wait a second, what just happened here? Because she didn't ask me about the manhole around. I mean, she didn't ask me about anything except for the marathon. Like, I go, that doesn't make sense. That's just one line in my resume. But when I got into Babson, she said to me, I asked you because I am a runner. I saw your application. I am a runner. I went right there. And I go, I didn't mean to trick you, but I wanted to hear the process, because if you were a BSer, I would have known. You walked through the process of training for a 26.2 race very, very well. And anyone that's committed to running that much time is committed to themselves. And I'm like, bravo, well done. I mean, and I think that's one of the things where there's no one out there telling us to be us out there.
Yeah. And you probably know a little bit of my background. So I went from being kind of like a lowly MBA student at Babson to working at Babson, then working my way up to being the Dean of MBA admissions. So being in charge of all that you described, this entire process of finding the candidates, selecting the candidates, bringing them to the school. And I did less and less interviewing as I grew through the ranks, but I always retained at least a small number sort of on my calendar. When there was a deadline coming up, I would try to interview a few candidates from any of the programs that were part of the portfolio, which had grown so much at Babson. And I was known for never following. We kind of had a script, if you wish, or sets of questions or things that we wanted to tease out of a candidate. But when you're the boss, right, you can break the rules a little more easily. So I was famous for going in all sorts of different kinds of directions. I mean, I would look at the resume or the essays of a candidate and be like, I absolutely have to talk to them about this particular part. So I was the person who interviewed you in a way, sort of, I'm like, I can get what I need out of this interview by not sticking to the script.
Well, and I think that's one of the things where you get the best out of any individual when you're not on script. I mean, I've told everybody, I don't ever look up when I'm talking to anyone, I'm not looking up anything about you because I'm going to talk to you. Like, I mean, I'm going to talk to you for a little bit, like a little bit close to an hour. Why am I going to sit there and do all this homework on you? It's very much like a Larry King, a very well-known interviewer. He passed away earlier this year. And it was just like, I love that model where, why can't we just talk and I can get to know you this way? And if I want to have a follow-up, we'll have interview number 2. But it's a great way to get to know someone by hearing from you. Why is it that you decided, like you had a job, you started this entire path, like to help people. I mean, you were in this position where you could bring people in. Now you're helping people get into any MBA program. But then we were dealing in a pandemic where everyone's at home and more people are realizing I kind of need to make changes. So people are making changes in themselves. They've been stagnant for such a long time and they realize I need to like really step up my game. You had a job that you were comfortable in and you were totally fine in, but then you started to create a career. So you're in this career that helps the individuals that are trying to figure out what to do next and kind of helps the people that you left.
To an extent. So how do I make this somewhat concise? Between Babson and today, there were 2 more jobs and they were both very opportunistic, but also very strategic in how they brought me to today. So after Babson, I kind of knew that I didn't necessarily want to be pegged to just working for a school forever and ever. I wasn't ready to say goodbye to the corporate world. Yep. And I had a really wonderful opportunity to join a consulting firm in higher education. I actually had been their client at Babson. They were one of my very important enrollment marketing, marketing, right, partners. It's called the Education Advisory Board. It's the largest higher ed consulting firm in the US.
Okay.
So they hired me because they were building a new enrollment marketing service specifically for graduate schools, not just business, but business was still a huge part of us. And they wanted a former client who understands the life of someone who's leading enrollment and marketing and can help them both sell, but also deliver. So for a couple of years, I pretty much just flew all over the US and spoke with deans, provosts, VPs of marketing, heads of admissions about what they need in the enrollment marketing. And as I was very happily doing this, I learned that the Graduate Management Admission Council, which is the owner of the infamous or famous, depending on how you feel about it, GMAT exam, right?
Yep.
So GMAT, the Graduate Management Admission Council, it's kind of like the industry association of graduate business schools. So they had acquired a company called the MBA Tour, and the MBA Tour was one of 3 players in the recruiting events space. So what the MBA Tour did was set up events at like 65 cities around the world every year where schools would pay to go and meet with prospective students. And the MBA Tour would do the marketing to bring those students to the event, right? So I had known the company, I had traveled with them. They were one of my partners when I was at Babson. So GMAT buys the MBA Tour because the entrepreneur who used to run the MBA Tour is selling and retiring. So GMAT is looking for the next CEO, right? managing director was the formal title. And the moment I read the news, I knew that that's probably where it's going. And I knew that I wanted to run the MBA tour, right? So I went after the job and I got it. And then I am happily running the MBA tour. In 2019, I traveled to 40 places on 4 continents. And I was actually scheduled to go on more, but I got sick at some point, not with COVID, although who knows, I actually got sick in China. So I had to slow down a little bit. I would have been probably at 50 places. And it was really wonderful. And I was meeting with candidates as well and working with schools, graduate business schools, building a new set of capabilities, creating a product roadmap for the company, because obviously it was acquired with the goal of being innovated and brought to a different level of growth. And then in 2020, as you know, March of 2020 or so, everything came to a stop. We actually were in the middle of executing events. When Boston went into a stay-at-home, I still had a team that was in Latin America delivering events, and we had finished India and the United States. And very quickly it became apparent that our next set of events, which was to commence in June, it's not going to happen, right? Unless we do something. And we had no virtual capabilities at the time. So in literally 3 months, that was Babson by the book. I've never felt more like I was running a startup. I had to create a virtual event platform worthy of serving the Harvard, Stanfords of the world, and many other clients as well, many other schools. And we did that. But the entire nature of the work changed as well. Like, you went from being on location, from speaking with candidates and seeing them face to face and seeing their interactions with schools, to being a technology company that sort of delivers a platform, but is not part of the interactions in any possible way.
But the thing is that that's what everyone went through at that time. I mean, like every single school, I mean, everyone that was traveling and trying to recruit, it just changed dramatically. It goes, so how did this company become the company that you have right now?
So when I joined the MBA tour, I will fully admit, opportunistic little me, Babson entrepreneurship, indoctrinated, right? Knew that this is the field that I know the best. This is gonna somehow be the teaching ground for what I'm going to do next. And as I got exposed to how schools do marketing, how events work, how people like what I'm doing now, admissions coaches operate, it sort of started to click. I'm like, there's an interesting intersection here of what I could be doing next.
Yep.
So as early as 2019, just for fun and giggles, I started building My MBA Path, my current venture, on paper. I gave it a name. I went and bought the domain, mymbapath.com. Because that's what I do. When I'm starting a business, I go and buy a domain. I have a whole bunch parked that never became anything, but My MBA Path did. So I started building on paper. I'm like, this is how I position myself. This is going to be my voice. This is what I'm going to sell. Initially, actually, it revolved around coaching candidates on location. And then of course, in 2020, my mental concept of this product had to change. But what also happened, a couple of things. I was definitely burnt out last year. I mean, I was working 17 hours a day because, again, building a virtual events platform in 3 months is not for the faint of heart.
Wait, so just being mindful of time, did you start the company before COVID or did you start the company during COVID?
So I made the decision to start the company during COVID, even though—
So what month, when was that?
So I formally launched on the first day of 2021, January 1st, because I did have to separate with my previous job before I was able to do this. Otherwise it would have been a conflict.
Okay. Yeah. So while you were at this, so you were burnt out, you're traveling all over, but you're getting all these skill sets. So now I'm going to actually layer this, again, being very mindful of time. You're watching the way that school is, I mean, you're watching the recruiting processes now because everyone's home. You're watching individuals that are trying to get the best of the best, but then there's like students that are like, I'm not going to do school like this, so I'm going to take an audit year. So the individuals that were on the second round, third round, fourth round are now finally getting into schools that they would have never thought about getting into because of what's happening. Why would you want to start a business all during the time? I mean, I know what you do, I know what you want, like what you are giving back, but why did you want it? Because I think this is what people are wanting to hear from you the most is, why would you take the risk of starting a business during a pandemic, knowing that you were in a safe zone? Academia is probably by far one of the most safest zones it could ever be in regards to career. So why would you want to start a career now? And what were the highs and what were the lows of starting this entire process?
So the biggest reason, Jodi, is that as I was building on paper in my mind, but on paper as well, I have this like long document. As I was building the concept of my MBA path, which I thought I was going to launch maybe a couple of years down the road, it started to take shape. And I started to be dying to take it live, to take it to market, to see how candidates respond. So it was just, it started to take a life of its own, right? And then I looked at the set of my circumstances and I said, okay, so I can actually afford to give it a try.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the conjecture of those two things, the idea of being ripe enough that the next logical step for me was, I have to try it.
Okay.
And the rest of my financial, if you wish, sort of where I was saying, okay, I can afford to take that risk and try it. And there was another little component to it in that there has been an increase of candidates to graduate business school, and therefore an increased need for services such as mine. So the time was very opportune again for me to enter now as opposed to wait.
Well, this is a great way of asking that question. Like, how do you find, who's your best client and how do you find them? How do they find you?
So I'm still figuring out what are my best marketing channels. I'm right now a company of one, but the way candidates find me is definitely through search, definitely through my presence on various platforms. Some of the most fruitful ones for me have been LinkedIn, has been incredibly great because it's a free place where I can simply put the content, the thought leadership that I produce, and people find it. I do my own PR, and because of the fact that I'm well known in this industry, I've actually had a lot of opportunity to voice what I'm doing, to chime into important conversations. So I'm very often quoted in major publications. I've been in the Wall Street Journal twice this year with opinions on professional topics, but that also gives you exposure. There are several major publishing platforms, including some that are owned by my previous employer, where I very often contribute and write. So content has been probably one of the main ways for me to get my voice out there, and also being able to write on topics that I believe I have knowledge about and feel passionate about is part of what I like to do. My ideal client, if you wish, is someone who has high aspirations and is willing to work very, very hard, and someone who just needs coaching and guidance to bring the best out of them. I always tell them, I'm not a shortcut. There's no magic sauce. The magic sauce really is a lot of hard work. If you're looking for someone who's going to do the work for you, I'm not your person. I don't do the work for you. You do the work. I tell you how to do it best.
What did the pandemic do for you overall? I mean, like, so again, you started your business, fantastic, but you have your career, everything that you've gone through. And I feel like there's been when I met you, like we were dealing with a recession of 2008, 2009. What did the pandemic do for you in regards of how did you take care of yourself? How did you prepare for where you are now? And also, we're still in a pandemic.
Interestingly enough, it actually had some positive impact on me that I was really getting tired of travel. I mean, 2019 especially was incessant. I mean, I was on a plane 5 weeks at a time, and literally it would be 2 nights in one city, 2 nights in another city. There are some places that I can't even say I saw. I mean, like to this day, I'm like, have I really been to Jakarta? Because technically I went into the country. I landed, I took a cab to the hotel. By the time I got through the terrible traffic in Jakarta, it was too late. I went to sleep. And then the next day I ran an event late into the evening. And then the following morning I got up and went back to the airport. So have I really been to Jakarta if I haven't left my hotel? So it had gotten to the point that literally my doctor actually was telling me that I need to slow down, because I started getting these respiratory infections, and they just wouldn't go away, and like this cough that just wouldn't go away. And at some point, that's why I was supposed to go to Africa, and I couldn't because I just wasn't healthy enough. Like my doctor was like, you don't go to Africa unless you're fighting fit, and you're not fighting fit right now. So you're staying grounded. So being able to slow down in terms of travel and just be home and enjoy my home was actually really great in so many ways. I also acquired a cat, which I'm a huge cat person. And to me, I feel that this is really great for my well-being. So I have this little COVID kitten. Well, he's no longer little, he's like 12 pounds, that I found one day in a park near me, abandoned or lost with a broken leg. So I call him my business partner. He's all healed now, and he's my co-founder.
I love that.
So from that perspective, actually being able to slow down a little bit, at least in my travel life, was really beneficial. And to an extent, I do credit the pandemic with my own soul searching that actually made me want to bite the bullet, if you wish, a little sooner, as opposed to playing it safe and continuing to save for 2 more years and continuing to prepare myself for 2 more years before I launched. It was kind of like, really, you're never going to be ready enough. So just go ahead and do it. There's this expression you've probably heard. It's called "do it afraid." So
100%. 100%. I feel like, I always say to people, like, we jump into the pool head first, knowing there's no water in the pool. It's just what we do.
It was kind of the risk I felt I was taking didn't seem excessive. And I was burning with desire to take my MBA path to the market. I just wanted to see what's going to happen when I put it out there. Will people respond to my messaging? Will candidates respond to my messaging? And like my favorite thing right now is when, like, out of the blue, someone will book a free consultation with me. I have no idea how they found me at first, because I purposefully don't put a lot of barriers in front of them, and I don't ask them a ton of questions when they first schedule time with me. And when I get someone and we start talking, and then towards the end of the conversation, they would say, I would ask them, like, how did you find me? Oh, I found you through search. And by the way, your branding is awesome. So like when someone says like your messaging or your branding is awesome, it just makes me so happy.
It's just like, I go, I do the same thing. I mean, as a marketing person, but I do the same exact thing when, and I'm like, I go, oh my God, it works. Yes.
Right.
It works. So I have 2 more questions. Where is the future of MBA going? You are helping people get into MBA programs. You see every other day there's another article. Is it worth it? Is it not worth it? Definitely go for it. Don't go for it. Don't invest. Don't spend that money. I mean, everyone has something. Coffee's good for you. Coffee's not good for you. Wine's good for you. Wine's not good for you. You are in the industry. Where do you feel that the industry is going now? Is an MBA even worth it?
It's funny because yes, an article came out just this week in the Wall Street Journal that talked about decreasing demand, even though it's unfortunate that the article is behind a paywall, because if you read it, you'll actually see that it's exactly the opposite. The majority of MBA programs had an increase 2 years in a row, which everyone who works in this space knows that that's a complete reversal of a trend of decrease for 10 years. So I'm actually working on a piece myself that's called The MBA is Dead, Long Live the MBA, because we're yet, and that happens every 10 years or so. Like, so the MBA is alive and well, but it's never going to be for everyone. And it shouldn't be for everyone. It's not the end all be all. It's not an end in and of itself, but it will continue to serve people who need formal training, formal education in a very concerted, sort of very structured way, people who want to gain access to a network, to a set of skills. There will always be a people for whom their why and where they're going is going to be very well served by an MBA. But what I also think is going to happen is there will continue to be a lot of substitutes, more so than ever before. And I'm seeing a lot of this. I mean, 2 quick examples. So Seth Godin, one of the fathers of marketing, if you wish.
Don't put him up there. Like, I hate when people do that. No, he's a marketing expert. He's not the father of marketing. Absolutely. I will stop you right there. No, and no. Like people that are not in marketing always say like, oh, they'll find one person. Like, no, marketing's been around since the caveman days. The father of marketing have been the people that are the pyramids. Do not do that. I will stop you right there.
Very true. Point
I'm not going to say I don't like the guy. I like the guy. I like what he says, but he's not the father of it.
Right. But he runs something called the Alt MBA, and it's a really great product. I actually wrote a piece about it. I interviewed some of his alums. And then there's a New York University professor who teaches at Stern, Scott Galway, who runs Section 4 now. I actually literally just learned this morning that one of his partners is now Babson, right? So Babson will be teaching a course on Section 4.
Well, yeah, like he's fun. I mean, like he's fun. If you listen to his podcast, he's a hot mess. And he says it.
He's like, 100%, but I'm
a hot mess. I go, the thing why he stands out is because he has no filter. And that's what people, he's tenure and he has no filter and he's not going to get fired. There are a lot of great people out there that can't say what they want to because they are in academia and they'll get fired.
But he also has some really great, like, I love his thought process. I mean, some of his predictions don't even come true, but of course, that's not the most important part about a prediction. The most important part about a prediction is why the person is saying what they're saying, and he walks you through his.
No, I totally understand it. But right now, I'm asking you about your prediction, not these guys. Okay, so not these men. I'm asking about yours.
Things are going to cool off. It's not going to be necessarily as competitive as it was the last couple of years. They will continue.
Why is that?
There will be alternatives for people to get what they need without necessarily taking time off from work and without the price tag. One of the structural changes that truly will continue to impact the field is that until the previous economic recession, 08, 09, the financial meltdown, companies were very willing to pay for your MBA. During 08, 09, that went away. So the demand for part-time MBAs is structurally impacted forever and ever. And that was one of the things that kept the demand for an MBA in balance. During recessions, people would go full-time, right? Because they were losing their jobs or they were uncertain or they were losing their bonus. So they went to school full-time. And then when things sort of settled and we regained our economic strength, they didn't necessarily go to full-time programs, but they would go to part-time programs because the employer would encourage them or pay for it. With that going away, there's no longer sort of that balance where, okay, you have growth of full-time at times and growth of part-time at other times. That is out of equilibrium. But also the alternatives, just the ability. Nowadays, you can learn about things, discrete things, in ways that are incredibly convenient, just in time, technology enabled, taught by experts. So that set of substitutes will continue to grow and take away from the need for some people to get an MBA.
Yeah, I have to say that as a marketing person, what I noticed and what I applauded was how during the pandemic, the amount of individuals that went and got certificates. And not just one certificate, multiple certificates from multiple schools. On the flip side, for the schools, the individual that's there for 4 years may not give the accolades to the school other than graduation, and maybe I'll send a check or something like that. But that individual that worked really hard and they got a certificate, it's all over. They're marketing it like crazy because they're so excited that they got a certificate from another school, etc. So I think that's like, it's a beneficial marketing benefit on both sides. I'm always looking on that side of it. But yet you're right. Why pay that price tag for an MBA when I know that I can actually get a lot of certificates, and those certificates in certain places mean a lot more than you getting an MBA, because the MBA is a little bit of everything, where that certificate is focused on specifically what I need you to do for this job.
I mean, the MBA always fills a gap. You're at a place, you know where you're going, and there's something that stands in the way of you getting from here to there. Lack of skills, lack of credentials, sometimes it's the credibility of the credential, lack of network, whatever it might be. So the MBA serves as a bridge. But again, for a subset of people, even if they consider an MBA, there will be a different bridge that will take them from here to there. It doesn't necessarily have to be a full degree.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So we've come to the end for now. We've come to the end. And I always say that I will always end any conversation with this, the same thing. I mean, so no matter how many times we talk, whether it's a group or whether it's just one-on-one again, I will always ask these two questions. If you had a personal ask and a professional ask of anyone that you are listening to right now, what would be your personal ask and what would be your professional ask?
All right. My personal ask would be very, very simple. Wish me luck, cheer for me, right? Spread the word if you can. So it almost becomes also my professional ask, because right now my personal and professional life are so entwined, right? That it's almost impossible to truly remove one from the other. But in terms of a professional ask, here's what I'm going to say. If you're listening, go check out mymbapath.com and give me feedback. I want to know, do my messages resonate? Does my branding look right? Sort of tell me what you think.
All right, so you cheated. So I clearly heard your professional, clearly. I'm gonna give you another try to do your personal. Come on now, come on.
Ooh, another try to do my personal. Goodness, I failed the personal stuff, huh?
I'm not gonna lie to you. You kind of did, because you just extended the professional.
I will make the craziest personal ask you've ever heard.
Nothing's crazy. Nothing. You saved a cat with a broken leg. Nothing's crazy.
Oh my God, it's about the cat, by the way. So here's my personal ask. Sometime in the near future and going forward, when we start traveling again, I'm gonna need someone to board my cat so I can travel. So if there are any listeners out there, especially in the Virginia area where I currently live, who want to board the most adorable, cuddly, affectionate, adventurous little guy, call me.
Okay, see, now that was a good one. I like that one. All right, so bravo all the way. All right, so I think you knew this, but I'm not sure. You knew that I went to Bulgaria, right?
I did. Okay.
Yeah, because I remember, because I remember when I was there.
Yes.
And so
I remember being completely fascinated, and I want to know why. I don't know if you want to stay on air now or later.
Oh, no. So I was in Israel, and while I was in Israel, I got a phone call saying, "Are you available to speak in Bulgaria? I mean, it's like a conference. We want you on 2 different panels." And I'm like, "Sure." And in my mind, I'm like, Balkans. I look, where are you? In my mind, I'm like, I couldn't remember. I know where, but I couldn't figure out.
Bottom right corner of the European map.
Yeah, exactly. But so they're like, I go, well, you're in Israel. It'll be a short drive. I'm like, no. I have to go back to the States. So you're flying me in from the States, not flying in from Israel. So it's funny because whenever I go to any country, I land, someone has my name, and I just go. I mean, I go to check. And the gentleman that picked me up was like, he goes, I'm like, do you speak English? He's like, no. I'm like, do you speak Bulgarian? I'm like, no. And I'm like, do you speak French? He's like, yes. I'm like, yes, because I'm Haitian. So it was so nice, because in Europe, you're going to get one of those mixes. So it was really, really nice and fun. And I had a wonderful man who was my driver, and we went to Plovdiv. I had such a great time, which is, while you were talking, for everyone that's listening, while you were talking, I walked away because I had to get.
Oh my God, wait.
Can you see it?
Is it rakia or wine?
It's like, it's that, I forgot what it's like. It's the one where everyone in Bulgaria says, if you're sick, you take it. If you're happy, you take it. If you like, no matter what, you just like
very strong brandy, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Brandy like.
Yeah. So and literally, and this is why I had the little cross, but I was told by everyone, like, you cannot leave Bulgaria without this. And I'm like, I've never opened it, but I think that when I open it, I'll open it with you.
You're going to have to.
Yeah, so I'll open it with.
I'm completely out. I have none in my house, and I'm almost like nervous about it because, yes, as a Bulgarian, you can't be without it.
It's the funniest thing. It's like Haitians with Haitian rum. You don't go to a Haitian house without Haitian rum, because it's the cure for everything. I mean, it's not just like, you don't just put it in punch.
Rub, massage.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yes, that's what he said. He's like, if you use this for everything. I'm like, I go, what do you mean? I'm like, you just drink it. He goes, no, you don't just drink it. You have a headache, you rub it on your temples. Yeah. I go, you need to rub it on your back.
If you have a stuffy nose, you put like cotton swabs in it, and then you stick them in your nose. Like,
stop it.
Yes.
No. Oh my God. But so yes, this has been in my house since I came back from Bulgaria. And it literally is the funniest thing in the world because it doesn't have the greatest taste, but it's
an acquired taste, Jodi.
Thank you. I was just gonna say it's an acquired taste. It's very, very bizarre, but I'm like, I'm not gonna leave Bulgaria without it. So yes, I brought this. I mean, I brought all of this other liquor that it's been since gone.
What
this is the only one.
year did you go? I'm trying to remember. Was it 19 or earlier?
It was 2019.
So you went to Plovdiv when Plovdiv was the European capital.
Well, the conference was in Sofia, and then afterwards I went.
Right, but Plovdiv was the European capital of culture that year.
Yeah.
I have more funny stories around that time, but we probably don't have time.
We don't have time, but I have to say, one, and also I love the fact that in Bulgaria it's it's literally 4 hours away from Greece, which I was like, ooh, I love that.
Yep. Sometimes less, because there's a border, right?
If you go back to the beginning, the first 15, first 20 podcasts I did, we'll call it Boris was the maitre d', not the maitre d', but he was the head of the hotel that I stayed in Sofia, and his family owns a hotel in Bulgaria on the Black Sea, right?
Yeah. Where did you stay in Sofia?
It was like a regular. I mean, I don't know, maybe a Hyatt or something. It was like a regular hotel, but he was just getting his training to go back to the family business, and he was one of the first people that I'm like, the second I saw that he left the hotel and went to the family business, I had him on, and he's awesome. He's totally awesome. My ultimate beautiful Bulgarian friend. He's like, when are you going to come to the hotel? I'm like, dude, I'm waiting for a pandemic to end, and the second I do, it's a direct flight. So I'm coming.
And the Black Sea should be on your list.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I enjoyed being there. I went on runs every single morning, safe as can be. I loved it. I loved everything about it. So I'm happy that you're in my life. I'm happy that you're from Bulgaria. I'm happy that, I talk about Bulgaria all the time. I love that I do that. And I love that you were courageous enough to start your own business to help people figure out their path. So
thank you,
my friend. Thank you. And until next time, again, there's going to be so many more conversations.
I am with you.
All right. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.